Want to do some special stuff here for the YouTube channel as we launch it this week. Make sure you check out the Ryen Russillo podcast on Spotify and Ringer. So I want to just be honest about how I look at my job, how I look at my role in this job in this industry, because I don't know that I take it entirely like as seriously as others do. It's probably not what I was dying to do when I was younger, but I knew that I love sports as I get a little bit older. But there is something that I actually always did care about. I'm not a reporter. There's nothing more like of a signal that you're telling on yourself is when you're like, hey, you're a journalist. You're like, not really. Like those guys are on E60. Okay. We're talk show hosts. That's all we're doing. All right. And if you start off in this industry and you have somebody that's been a radio lifer, a TV lifer, or now podcasting, they're going to tell you it's entertainment first. And more so to get that attention, it is say things that get attention. All right. I know the easiest path, and I don't think I took the easiest path, but I know the easiest path to get reaction. But whenever I was talking in the very beginning, and I still think spending not even a full season, but in minor league baseball, being around a team every single day, it definitely shaped me, and it shaped the way I looked at eventually having a role in the media. Okay. That if I was going to be on the air every day, even though I know I'm going to get a million things wrong, being opinionated at the time at ESPN, like 15 hours a week, and now podcasting 3 episodes a week, like you're just going to get stuff wrong. But what's the reason behind getting it wrong? Well, the unpredictability of sports is a big part of it. Another way to be wrong is just say the dumbest shit ever and not care. I admire a lot of the guys. I don't respect, but I'd say I admire some of the people in my industry. They're just like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't care. I'm just going to say stuff. Now, one of the greatest compliments I could ever have, and when it happened, it was something that meant a lot to me, is if I'd be at more of the NBA stuff because I was more aligned with that. I would go to the draft camps going all the way back to Virginia, Orlando. Then they moved it back to Chicago, thank God. And then I hosted the combine for years, and I still go to the combine every single year. And one of the most important things to me would be if somebody who did the job, whether they were a coach or somebody who worked in the front office, they would say like, hey, I heard what you said or whatever. And, and I would almost like jump in and go, hey, look, I'm not around your team. I know there's so much that you can't get. Like a perfect example is working in the media and seeing how the media is covered, how often me and my friends that work in this industry, and we'll see a story and be like, oh my God, that's not even close to what happened. So if you think of it that way, and then you think about, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm essentially a movie critic about sports, which is not necessarily anything I aspire to do, but I will have the conversation with somebody that works on the actual team side of it and go, hey, I'm trying. Okay. I'm trying to do the best I can, because even though I know I'm going to be wrong, I don't want to be wrong for the wrong reasons. And it means a lot if somebody comes up and says, hey, you do a pretty good job, knowing that there's going to be times where I'm going to have a theory or a big opinion, and the people that are in the locker room, right? The people that are on the inside of the organization, they're just going to be like, well, look, you're too detached from this. You don't actually know the motivation behind why we won or why we lost. So what's happened in the last few years, which I think is incredibly interesting, and how fast my industry has changed, and I don't know what the end game of it all is. I didn't even realize that podcasting would be this popular, is the player to consumer content, the direct line of that, right? Draymond Green at one point called it new media. And it's like, look out, right? Guys like me, not Draymond, obviously me, might become irrelevant at some point. I guess I'm old enough that I wasn't entirely threatened, but I'd wonder maybe if I was 25, 26, like would I be getting in the wrong line of business as a non-athlete, non-former coach or anything? Will this kind of content take over? Well, we've had a few years with this kind of content. And let me just say this. With some of the shit these players are saying, I think the media people are probably going to be around for a little while. Because as much as I worried about being wrong, guys that played, I'm like, how do you land on this conclusion? So maybe we're all more alike than we ever realized. It's just some were bigger than others. Udonis Haslem just this week said something about how Chris Bosh was the most important player on the Miami Heat team. He said, quote, everybody thinks our most important player was Bron, our most important player, not our best player. but our most important player was Chris Bosh. He was our most important player because if Braun went down, you could call in D Wade. And to give Haslam a little bit of credit here, he said, look, he's not the same player, but you could get kind of the same results. I get his point. It's also not true. It's just not. Like, that just sounds like you're trying to be a little different. Honestly, that sounds like something a media guy would say that didn't play. Like, everybody's saying this, but I think I'm going to say that. He was teammates with these guys, and he said it. Now, look, before Bron got there, after the Wade championship with Shaq, he didn't win one playoff series for 4 years until LeBron showed back up. That's why I always thought that stage of D Wade doing like 2 years of interviews where he wanted credit for like turning the keys over to LeBron and allowing him to have the Heat be his team. You're like, yeah, you think so? You think? I mean, he's the second best player of all time. So even though Bosh fit a need, maybe a little bit more based on their roster construction, there was never a day where anyone was more important than LeBron James. That's not even that bad. That's the appetizer to some of this stuff. My all-time, like, I don't know if there ever will be a replacement on my Mount Rushmore of former players saying stuff where I'm like, how could you have played this game and thought this was true? But when Kendrick Perkins essentially suggested that Jokic was stat padding, and yet we applaud Jokic and we criticize Westbrook, that one blew my mind. All right. I don't know how anybody gets, I don't know how anyone could play this sport professionally. One of the best players in the world at this level. And you could watch those two guys playing a basketball game and be like, yeah, that's the same thing. We're just being unfair to the other guy. Gilbert Arenas has been on an absolute heater. It's good for the breakout videos. I mean, he's been all over the place. And he recently said, even though we will allow that he softened his stance, that Euros are destroying defense and have been because the NBA wanted to expand internationally because of all that money. By the way, of course they wanted to expand internationally. You know, why do you think we have some of these games in the NFL where you're like, where are they playing again? All of these brands, all of these businesses want to find a way to get more international money pumped into it because it's a business and they're just trying to increase the profitability every single time, right? So that's pretty simple math. But when you're talking about the actual guys playing in the games and you're like, you know what? If you want defense again, get rid of the Euros. That's incredible. Now, I do wonder if the American basketball player is seeing what's happening right now and going, I don't like this, so I'm going to be critical of it. Because if you go through the top 5 players in the league right now, they're all international. And that's if you put SGA 5th. And I'm not doing that to just, hey, let's throw a Canadian guy in there so I can make the list 5 instead of 4. But SGA is not going to finish lower than probably 4th in the MVP voting. I don't know if Tatum is the American MVP. Maybe you can name it after, I don't know, the pillow guy or something. But there's probably a pride that this was always an American sport, and that now when you look around and look at the best players and who's winning MVPs and who's winning some of these titles, you're like, wait, what's going on in this sport? Now, the idea that banning Euros would then increase the defensive stuff is a joke. If you actually dig in and watch 80s and 90s games on YouTube and look at the defense, it's completely overrated. The perception of what it is so beyond what it actually is when you watch it. Okay. I promise you, if you take time to go, I'm going to lock in here for a couple hours and watch games from that era. Yes, guys were bigger, but there was less space. So there were more collisions, but there weren't even close to the number of ridiculous fouls that we see every time somebody wants to pull up a Pistons Celtics clip or a Pistons Bulls clip that are actually pretty rare plays. We had Cheryl Swoops chime in about Caitlin Clark. Cheryl Swoops, one of the most accomplished players in her sport, basically said Clark's getting these numbers because she's a lot older, got the age wrong, and had the extra year of COVID, and she didn't. Swoops apologized, but it was funny because when people came after Swoops, people were actually nicer about that because they were like, hey, respect her. Be like, can I respect what she's done? And also think, man, that's weird. You're being super critical of somebody who's supposed to be kind of the face of the sport that you would like to grow. And then we've got Draymond Green, who actually has figured out the monologue part of this better than any other former player that I've ever seen. It's actually like, as somebody who has to do it all the time, and I find it can be really challenging, I love that Draymond just fires up a microphone and sits there. But look, the media is still guilty of a lot of this stuff. There was something recently, I think it was on ESPN, where they were already talking about whether or not Wembanyama was going to like ask out of San Antonio. That's a new record. Even if there are former players on the desk, that has to be a new record. Like, hey, man, what could happen? It's probably nothing. He'll probably play out the rookie scale contract. He'll get an extension. And usually guys start asking around a little bit later than, say, March of their rookie year. So we're both capable of doing both of these things, right? I believe the lesson on all this is a pretty simple one. If you have a microphone in front of you for a long enough time, you're going to say something that's probably really fucking stupid, okay? But what I'd always ask is like, what was the motivation behind that? Is it because you just got it wrong? Because that's going to happen. Or is it because you were like, I'm ready to stir it up today? And again, maybe the second one is actually the right way to do the job, which I've always admitted through some of my own frustrations in my career. But I'll never forget watching the clip of Perkins going after Jokic last year. And it was like getting ready, right? And you could see that he and Stephen A and the producers had talked about it in the pre-show meeting, because Stephen A kind of like resets like, hey, audience, put your gloves on because we got a sizzler for you here. It's like, are you saying Kendrick Perkins, whatever? And, you know, the premise is that teammates were shooting to get Jokic the assist. And I'm still messed up about this opinion from somebody that played. But again, the lesson, back to it. It's that maybe when there was this idea that it was going to be this direct to consumer athlete, current, former, whatever, athlete, direct to the audience, that everything was going to change and that everything was going to be different. The lesson is we aren't that different. The resumes are different. The qualifications are different. But I don't need to have 20,000 points to say something just as dumb as you.